Well, I think I'm going to start off, and hopefully the internet will catch up to me. So, first of all, I would like to say good evening and to welcome you and thank you for coming out to this Humanist seminar. Now, there are a couple of things I would like to say about our committee. I'd like to introduce the members of our committee first of all, and I'll ask you to wave a hand. So we've got Lisa and Wadud and Stefan and Dylan, and whom I'm missing, and Shane. And I'm also a member. Now, there are a couple of things about our committee. One, we will always welcome additional people to work on that committee. So if you're interested, please get in touch with one of us. And then secondly, we had hoped that this humanist endeavor would be, is it working?
No, not yet.
Oh. We hope that this humanist endeavor would be self-supporting, and that if people are reading an article or a book, and you think it would be a substance for a session of the Humanist Forum, please come and talk to us. We'd be just delighted to have your support. Now, the presentation tonight is based on a book called The Religious Virus. Now, think about that for a title. Well, that title really got me excited to think about a religious virus as like an epidemic spreading around the world. And so that was one thing that got me interested. Analyzed this phenomena. We're still not getting anything, guys? It still says updates are underway. Okay, so he talked about the similarities between memes and genes. And I'm going to talk at first about genes, to just make sure that everyone has a kind of a similar idea about genes. Now, there's a new science. I don't even know how to pronounce the name, but it's something like abiogenesis. And this is the science of trying to create life from dead matter. And the interesting thing is they've had some degree of success with that. They have been able to create single-celled living creatures as a result of these kind of experiments. Now, the main approach that they use is to try and simulate things that might have been happening way deep in the past of the evolution of our Earth. And think about different temperatures and different gases that are in the air and different chemicals. And the basic idea is that somewhere along the way, probably about 5 billion years ago, there was just a unique and combination of elements that produced life, just as the scientists are able to do it today. And then over time, that basic, which wasn't called a gene, of course, at that time, but a gene, gradually evolved into different forms. Now, the thing that gives that support, a special support, is the fact that when we look at any living species, the gene genome for that species is very similar. So we know from research, for example, that they'll tell us that the common earthworm has 50% of its genes are the same as human genes. And if we talked about more advanced species of apes, it can be anywhere from 95 to 98% of their genes are the same as human genes. So the fact that all living species seem to have a genetic base that's similar suggests that it arose in this way. Now, and it's believed that that happened about 5 billion years ago, so there's been a lot of time for evolution to take place. Now, I want to give an illustration of genetics and how it works, because just to make sure we all understand this. And I'd like to use the giraffe as an example. A lot of people look at the long-necked giraffe and think it got its long neck because it was always reaching for leaves on the highest branches of the trees. Well, that's just not the way it works. But when there was food shortage, the giraffes with long necks thrived, and those with short necks perished. So it wasn't that short-necked giraffes suddenly become long-necked, but it was that the giraffes that had genes that produced long necks survived, and the others, what's happening? Presentation. It's on there now? Oh, but can I get it on this screen as well, so I know? No, but I'm not seeing that. Can you get it on here as well? This one is still underway.
Oh, from the back of here. Oh, I see.
Oh, can you change it so that I can see the slide on my computer?
Only over there. It's from there.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
How do you want to do this?
Well, you know, a year ago, I was able to stand for a presentation. I hate to admit it, but this is a sign of old age. I need a support now. So just move it down that way a bit, and then I can glance at the screen periodically. So I'll have to signal you at the back then to move the slide forward. So just move forward. And there's the book I was talking about. Keep on. Carry on. Some more. And more. Okay, let's stop there. Okay. There's some things we know about genes that are common elements, and that is that there's diversity and abundance of genes. So those are two things in the evolutionary path that become important. Now, as far as diversity is concerned, we can see the diversity amongst human beings. Just look at the group here, everyone different. But yet, if we trace any aspect of not just human, but of living creatures, it could be the height of people. If you got all of the people in the world, it would, of course, produce what we know of as the normal curve, or the bell-shaped curve. So we know that there's diversity amongst all species. And the thing we don't know, or at least most of us don't know, and I sure as hell didn't know until I started reading and studying this a bit, is that there's the same kind of diversity amongst genes. So there are thousands of genes, but only a few of them are activated. So when one particular gene is not meeting the challenges of the time, then a different gene takes over. And if there isn't a different gene to take over, that species disappears, and the genes go into the dead gene pool. So diversity is one thing. And it's hard to imagine that. Like scientists will tell us that there could be 1,000 or more genes on a single chromosome. I didn't know this, but they tend to attach themselves. They've got a love affair with chromosomes. They attach themselves there. Now, when it comes to diversity, to abundance of species, just think about the turtle, for example. It can produce up to 100 eggs, and yet maybe only 2 of those eggs will go to maturity. The humble spider can have 1,000 babies. Now, so nature depends on large numbers. So if there's a failure somewhere in the system, there's some other creature with different set of genes, the same species but different set of genes, that can take over. So this is an important concept to understand about genes. Boy, this is awkward. Could we change that at just a little bit of an angle so I can glance at it periodically? Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? So I talked about the giraffe as an example of genetics. Now, the author gave a very interesting illustration of this particular moth. Now, it's interesting, there were entomologists working in the 1700s, and there's this particular moth that's very common in Britain, and they had charted this, and 90% of them were white moths with black dots, and 10% were black with white dots. That sounds like a little bit of a tongue twister there. So anyway, this is something that was well documented. Then 75 years later, they're doing an analysis of this species, and they find it's totally switched around. 90% are black moths, 10% white. Did white moths suddenly become black or what? Well, here's the explanation. There are a lot of poplar and we've got all kinds of poplar and birch trees, and they've got white bark. So the white moths on the back bark were sort of camouflaged, but the black ones were easy picking for the birds. So they wiped them out. But then, by the middle of the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution had taken a dominant place in Europe, and all kinds of coal dust was being spread around. So those white poplar birch trees got to be black or gray. So now the black moth had the advantage, and the white moths were picked off. So it's just kind of interesting to see how that genetic change can come with one species coming to the forefront under certain circumstances, and then under different circumstances, another one comes forward. Okay, so let's move on to the next. Well, I just have to emphasize what's on there in red, and that is the idea that change takes place at the genetic level first, and then gets transferred to the species. Does that make sense to you? Okay, let's go on. Survival of the fittest is a key thing here. Okay, next slide, please. Now, Dawkins, with his overview of this, was able to make some comparisons between genes and memes. And he found, if you look at genes, we all know about genes, this biological distribution there, mating and children and offspring and so on, to get a gene pool widely spread. But then for memes are spread in a cultural way. Now, I can just give an illustration of this. If I tell person A a story, and they repeat it to person B, then that idea gets spread and soon spread around to many people. Now, on the other end, if I tell a story, and this person that hears it says, that's the most stupid thing I ever heard, then it doesn't get passed on. So it's like a gene that gets rejected, and it falls into the meme pool of life and never to be heard of again, maybe. Now, the characteristics that are key here both compete for survival. And I don't really like it just quite in that phrase, because it's not as though they're running a race, but they're competing in this way, that if one fails, the other takes over, that kind of competition. And that's true of both memes and genes. Now, they both replicate, and replication is a key thing in this. They both mutate. Now, if I tell a story to someone, and they pass it on to another person, but they change the story a bit, make it more interesting, make it sharper, whatever, that's a mutation of the meme, just as there can be mutations of the gene. But there's something I could have mentioned about genes, because I've never read quite the point I'm making here, but I get some understanding that most species are in a fairly stable state. So there are not an awful lot of genetic changes taking place. No, we'll remember from COVID how we saw at least 2 or 3 variations of COVID within a very short period. So this was all a matter of mutation. But scientists say that by and large, the mutations have not been helpful in the advance of a species. And most of them just fade away into the gene pool. So both mutate, and genes are, well, that's repeating a point here, but genes transfer through biological evolution, and memes through cultural evolution. Okay, next slide, please. Now, there was a lot of interest in this concept of memes. There was interest in the academic community. In fact, they developed what started off to be a new branch of science called memetics. But they found that they could really make use of this idea in studying religion or studying different ideologies developed, because what they could do using this technique is to look back and see what are the kinds of things that people said to one another that spread that idea. So it never evolved as a science, because I guess to be a science you have to have a fairly specific body of knowledge, and it wasn't deemed to meet that criteria. But it's a method that is being used by many scientists in trying to analyze different movements. Now, as I say, memetics has not flourished as a science. Now, I want to just give a little bit of my first reaction to memes, and that goes back to 1975 when the book The Selfish Gene came out. I can just still remember the discussion among people as we read that, and the whole idea of a selfish gene, and that's part of the human species. It almost sounds like an insult. We're compassionate, caring, loving people, but we're selfish in the inner being. But the selfishness, of course, has nothing to do with morality. It has to do with each gene within our body is in a kind of a competition state. If it doesn't succeed, then another gene takes over. So my first reaction to this idea was pretty negative. As a teacher trained in 1950, we were given the message that part of our job was to transfer culture from one generation to another. And so it made me think, my gosh, that's all we're doing, just repeating genes and passing memes and passing them on. And I mentioned in the paper that I was giving a talk like this back in 1970. The title would probably be Beyond Memes to Meaning, because I think meaning is so important and so on. But I'll talk more. I've changed my attitude on that a bit, though. Okay, let's go on to the next slide, please. Now, memes on the internet. Now, the author was very much aware of how the internet has, there's a seat up here, Murray. The author was very much aware of how the internet has usurped the whole concept of memes and has abused it in many ways. And he debated whether he should even use the term in his book. But he decided to use it, but periodically, instead of referring to memes, he'll talk about a unit of thought or something like that to keep clear that he's not talking about the memes that circulate on the internet. Now, the unfortunate thing is memes are really ideal for the internet because they're brief, they're witty, they're eye-catching, and so on. So many different things about them make them very attractive. And so they're what you'd call rapid spreaders. They spread ideas rapidly. Now, when Dawkins first talked about this, he talked about a meme moving from one mind to another. But then with the internet, what can happen is a meme can move from one mind to thousands or maybe even millions of minds. So it becomes a very dangerous phenomenon in a way. And so I note how it's ideal for spreading information, conspiracy theories, and so on. Now, I hate to think of calling Trump a master of anything, but in many ways, he is a master of means. And I've quoted a few of his statements like Crooked Hillary, Lock Her Up, and Sleepy Joe. Now, it's interesting, every one of those little phrases has a whole bundle of meaning in it. And for many people that aren't supporters of the Republican Party, this is repugnant. But for people that do support Trump, boy, that just verifies that Hillary is part of the Clinton clan, and they're filled with guilt and all kinds of corruption. So each of those carries a message with it that's far greater than the meme itself. Now, I just picked up a few of the more dramatic memes. One of the ideas that spreads among certain people is that there have been little green men visited this earth, and some of them died here and some of them were killed. And the government is hiding those and concealing them somewhere in a vault in the deep bowels of government. And so that meme is out there as a ridiculous idea, but yet followed by many, many people. Then the QAnon memes, there are dozens of those, and most of them are totally irrational, but yet they catch on, and there's a whole body of QAnon believers. And I just quoted one of them, that politicians drink the blood of children. Yuck. But it gives them extra energy and boost their whatever. So anyway, that meme spread fairly widely, and in fact it got one fellow from the West Coast so excited, they traveled right across the country to New York, carrying guns and ammunition and explosives, and he went to this pizza parlor where the memes were, where the blood was being dealt with in the basement, and he found there was no basement in that pizza parlor. But that didn't stop him. He just thought he had the wrong address and kept on into the search. But they can be symbolic, satire, cartoons, and short videos. Yes.
Remember a number of years ago, there's people actually went to prison. They were accusing these schools of devil worship.
Yeah.
And they took the children and questioned them in such a way that put ideas in their head, and they had people actually went to prison.
Yeah. Oh, there are strange things that happen. Let's go on, folks. Okay, that's a little cartoon that shows a bit of the meme nature and the mean nature of memes. You may not be able to read the bottom one, but on the left, it's the left wing, their side is evil. On the right, we have our side is awesome. So, it's just fascinating disgusting, but fascinating in a strange way. Okay, let's go on. Now, I mentioned the author is very conscious, has already dealt with that. But I wanted to just kind of take an overview of the book and give you my perspective of what it's all about. He wants to highlight how religious memes that lack integrity, they lack meaningfulness and so on, yet, and they're based on science that 2,000 plus years old and all kinds of superstition, and how those memes are playing an important part in religion today. And then he wants to show how elements of culture reinforce those memes. And there we're talking about how beautiful, stately cathedrals and people with robes and special garments are up at the front talking about this. So, and then beautiful music and then a whole large group of people sort of bowing and kneeling and all the rest of it. All of this creates an environment that encourages people to say, gosh, there must be something to that. And first thing they know, they go along with it and never stop to question those memes. And then he talks about how these memes are spreading throughout the world, and they're like a contagion, it's like a virus. Now, part of his book is to say we need to find a vaccination for that virus. And in the second part, I'll talk about his vaccination approach. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, he has a very interesting chapter called the God's 4,000-Year Marketing Makeover. Kind of an intriguing thought. But if you think of Abraham, who lived about 4,000 years ago, or Moses, who lived about 3,000 years ago, this was still a stage when polytheism was the order of the day. Now, the main god at that time was Jehovah, or Jehovah, and he was presented, like Abraham talked about, having dinner with him. He was kind of a human person with God qualities. I think I said he's like a model for Donald Trump. But anyway, he was jealous and could be vengeful, and he could do terrible things like unleashing a flood or plagues or commit genocide. So then after the time of Moses, and especially with the 10 Commandments, the first commandment goes something like, thou shalt have no other gods before thee. Well, this is the jealousy of Jehovah coming to the forefront. I want you guys to recognize I'm top guy here and no competition. And so the point I want to make is that by the time we get to the time of Jesus, the idea of one God was pretty much consolidated. And by that time, there are also many stories being told about a Savior coming in some way. So there was some groundwork for Jesus in the background. So the all-purpose, omniscient, omnipotent God was proposed even by 0 AD. Now, if you've forgotten what those words mean, omniscient is all-knowing. He hears the sparrow fall. Omnipotent means all-powerful. So that's a pretty powerful God's position. Okay, let's go on. Next slide, please. Now, the religious virus concept is really, when you think about it, fairly straightforward, that there are many memes have been developed throughout time, and some of them have survived, and they've had a tremendous impact on people, and they're passed on to one another, and they're replicated, and they're not necessarily true or accurate. They simply survive because they seem to meet the need at the time. So as with genes, it's survival of the fittest. But the fittest, remember to emphasize that, means only fitness in how people feel that they meet the needs of the time. Next slide, please. Now, I was looking for memes in the polytheistic period, and I didn't find anything in the literature, but it's not hard to imagine how there'd be many memes created in that time. And then, in fact, when we look at the memes on the next slide, many of those go back to way back in history. So let's go on to the next slide. Now, in the book, the author lists a number of these memes, and just glance over that list. The monotheism meme, only one God, an all-powerful God. The intolerance meme, other religions are false. This is the Jehovah, worship only me. The guilt meme. Now, there's something to realize here. According especially to Catholic doctrine, you are born in sin, and you have to be baptized to be able to be released from a life in hell. And this is why parents that have a sick child are so eager to get that child baptized as soon as possible, because if he isn't baptized, then he could spend the rest of his existence in hell. Now, many churches have not adopted that, but it certainly was, at a certain time, was very important. The heaven meme, hell meme. I could have added several other memes in there as well. I'll just deal with one other one, the Immaculate Conception meme. And I must say I always had the wrong idea about that. I thought the Immaculate Conception applied to Mother Mary of God, Mary, Mother of God. But that's not true. That's not the way it is. You see, if Mary was sinful, Jesus would be sinful, born in sin. But they couldn't have that happen because Jesus is godlike. So what they did, the Immaculate Conception applied to the Mother of Mary, and she was made immaculate and pure. So therefore, Mary was immaculate and pure, and she could be the vessel to create the God, the Son of Jesus. So these are sort of a list of some of the memes that were dominant. So let's go on to the next one, please. Now, the memes were not only in words, but also in symbols. And often the fish was a symbol of Christianity. And I think it relates to the story. It was Peter the fisherman and Jesus the fisher of men, or something like that. I've forgotten how that story goes. But it's kind of interesting. In the first years after the death of Jesus, Christianity was illegal. And so Christians would often make the sign of a fish in the sand to tell another person, I'm Christian, we can talk safely about this. And then that Greek letter, I know nothing about Greek, so I had learned what that meant. But those are the first two letters of the word Christ. And so that became a symbol. And then you can see the anchor of life, the dove and peace and forgiveness. And let's go on to the next slide, please. Now, that colorful one on the side there, that's the Greek letters for Alpha and Omega. And once again, I had to learn that. But the A for Alpha is the same as RA. The lowercase a is like a symbol for infinity. And then the Q sign. So that carries the idea of from beginning to end, that God will look after you from the beginning of your life to the end of your life. And then you can see just a whole collection of different symbols there that are that kind of embody something of the life of Jesus and the early religion. And those kind of symbols were carved on tombstones and so on. They're a very important part of conveying these ideas. Okay, next slide, please. Now, ask the question, what was the appeal? What was the powerful appeal of all of this? Well, there are a lot of things. For one thing, they were simple. There is a God. That's pretty easy to hear and so on. They're simple, they express ideas with brevity and conciseness. They involve stories in many cases, and people love stories, and they love to spread stories. I'm just thinking of something I should have mentioned earlier. And then confirmation bias is the idea that if you hear something that sort of fits in with your preconceived ideas, then it's more acceptable to you. Emotions, and especially emotions that appeal to very basic emotions like hope, fear, love, and joy. And then authority, if you believe that the Bible is an authority, then that gives you readiness to accept that meme. Group cohesion, a group that sticks together. Minimally counterintuitive. That means if an idea somewhere fits within your realm of possibility, your idea of the realm of possibility, you might say, well, that's a bit far-fetched, but you never quite know what can happen. So maybe that's within the realm of possibility. So let's go on to the next slide, but these are part of the reasons why this was so appealing. Now, I want you to try to think back to the years after the birth and death of Christ. And it's amazing how Christianity spread in different years, in different ways in those first 300 years. There were multiple sects developed. And the interesting thing is many of them had the characteristic of churches. They had bishops and organizations, but they were all preaching different messages. They picked up on different memes and taught different messages. So the Emperor Constantine saw what was happening, and in 325, he called together a conference of all the bishops of these different groups and other people that were voicing ideas about the nature of the religion. And they met at Nicaea, which is a city on the Mediterranean in Turkey, and they spent about 3 months debating and trying to decide what are the main doctrines we want to agree upon. And I'm going to talk more about this, but one of the main ideas they came up with was the Trinity, the idea of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That goes directly back to the Council of Nicaea. Now, the discussions weren't necessarily smooth. There were conflicting memes, different ideas that people had. And one of those memes, one of those differences centered around what is called the Arian controversy. Now, Arian is sometimes spelled with a Y in there, but the Arian controversy had to do with what is the nature of Christ, of God. What is the nature of Christ, pardon me? What is the nature of Jesus? And one point of view was that Jesus was of the same substance as God. That word is used often, the same substance. Now, I never did find what they said the substance of God was, but whatever it is, Jesus was the same. And then there was a different attitude that developed, and that was the idea that Jesus was just a normal human being, but a wonderful teacher. So these were two ideas that were kind of argued out in the Council of Nicaea, and they came up with the Trinity idea, and I'm going to talk more about that later. Well, in fact, I'll talk about it right now, because the name of our church is directly related to what happened here, because the Arians, they believed in a God, but one God. So unity, a Unitarian, as opposed to a three-person God. So that's where the name of our church actually originates with. So that's the Unitarian connection. So as mentioning, there are different disputes about religious issues. And another one was an adoption meme. And some people thought the idea of God coming to earth and having a child with a married woman and the involvement of adultery and things like that. And so they kind of wondered if there's some other way. So the story came up as an alternative that Jesus was such a fine fellow that God adopted him and gave him godly powers. So that was another meme. So they had to argue that one out, and of course they settled on the idea of Jesus as the Son of God. And then the resurrection meme was another area where there's a lot of controversy. And some people believed that Jesus rose from the dead on the third day. His body disappeared to the tomb and went up to heaven. But there was another group of people that said, no, that's not what happened. There's a guard guiding the cave. Apparently the body was in a cave of some sort. I don't know the story very well. And there was a stone in front of it and a guard guarding it. And apparently one story was that he was bribed and ignored, and then they pushed the stone aside and stole the body and hid it. So those were two points of view that were being argued out. And the resurrection meme carried the day. Now, I knew this was going to be a fairly heavy talk in a way, so just a little deviation here. So anyway, I went to the internet and asked for jokes about memes, thinking about memes themselves. And I'm sure I read 50 or 60 meme jokes. And there's hardly one that got a chuckle, and certainly none of them bared repetition. But anyway, that word made me think of a little story which I'll share with you. On this particular Sunday, the priest was going to look after the Sunday school class. So he came into the class and said, "Good morning, boys and girls. Today we're going to talk about the resurrection." Now, who can tell me what the resurrection is? So there was total silence. And the little boy stuck his hand and he said, "Well, I don't really know what the resurrection is, but if it lasts more than 4 hours, you have to go to the hospital." So that's the moment of levity for us. Okay, let's move on. Now, the Nicene Creed, and I've included the Nicene Creed in that paper because I wanted you to see how those many memes are embedded in the Nicene Creed. I started a little exercise myself to underline memes and then put the name of the meme in there. And it's really a collection of memes in many ways. But that document was extremely important. And it is basically the basis of almost every Christian church in existence right now. Now, a significant thing happened in 380, and the emperor of the Roman Empire made the Nicene Creed the official religion of the Roman Empire. So that was a powerful boost for this. Now, the Nicene Creed, or some variation of it, is the basis of almost every Christian religion around the world. And just think about it. For 17 centuries, 1700 years, that creed has been recited and repeated by thousands and thousands of people. So it has had a tremendous, profound influence on the evolution of Christianity. So I just added a little quip there. In the battle of the memes, the Trinitarians won, the Unitarians lost. Okay, next slide, please. Now, I could have probably left this slide off because we've kind of talked about this already, but I still find it interesting to think a little bit about this, because one of the real attractions here is that even though the memes that are associated with Christianity create fear, the idea of hell and damnation and so on, they also provide a consolation with the idea of heaven and so on, and forgiveness. And the message is repetitive. It's built on stories. Let me just bring in something that I meant to talk about earlier. When we're talking about genetic evolution, the evolutionary process gave incentives there for reproduction. The sex drive, which is there in every species and helps to move along people to produce and be fruitful. Well, when it comes to memes, there seems to be a drive, a very innate kind of drive in people, if you hear a story, to want to repeat it. That seems to be something common with all people. So that instinct in people is something that helps to make memes move along in the system. Then it appeals, I'm kind of repeating a few points there, but here, religion survives because it spreads effectively, not because it's true. Now, that's the author's words, but I would really kind of support that. So let's go on to the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, I didn't feel I could make that comment without tempering it in some way. And so I talk about Christianity today. And I'm certainly not the person who should be talking about Christianity today. But like everyone else, I can observe things that are happening. And I'd make a couple of observations here. One, that progressive dominations are certainly more than a bundle of memes. They de-emphasize dogma and stress the social gospel, peace, justice, reconciliation, and similar aims. Yet, when I read notices on the signboards for churches, it seems to me they're frequently emphasizing some really very basic meme. And the same thing, if any of you listen to religious programming on TV or radio, my gosh, well, that's really the evangelical churches and conservative Protestants that are the main promoters there. But it's just filled with memes, the blood of Jesus, the sacrifice on the cross, and just all of the traditional religious ideas are front and center in every part of it. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Now, I want to bring in this idea of nons in here, and I've talked about that with our group before. I think most of you are familiar with the idea, but non stands for people that have no religious affiliation. And the 21 Canadian census showed that over a third of the population of Canada are nons, falling into that category. And a more recent study in 25 showed the figure to be 41%, and the author said, depending on how the questions were asked, that figure could be between 50 and 70%. So if we think about what is being reported about virtually empty churches or churches occupied mostly by older people, I think there's a lot of truth in that. So when people are asked, what is your concern? A lot of it is related to church leadership and authority, and especially in the Catholic Church where many people are repelled by the abuses that have taken place there. But then there are religious memes that are related to homosexuality, gender issues, women's roles, abortion, and so on. These are things that many people, they hold different beliefs, and they object to the way the church is promoting those things. But the most basic thing seems to be that many people are rejecting the very basic ideas of the church. I think that slide has a message for all religions, that if you want to remain alive and capture the ideas of a large segment of our population, we're going to have to revise our memes. And I think that applies to our church as well as to any other church. Okay, next slide. Now, Kathy added this as a result of my conversation with you. But anyway, I would not want anyone to come away from this talk tonight with the idea that I'm saying memes are the new great path to knowledge. I couldn't be a teacher and say that, because I firmly believe that the path to knowledge is education, books, lectures, forms of media, and serious conversations. These are the major avenues for knowledge. But complex ideas require background knowledge, they involve uncertainty, and they take time to understand. And this all requires time and energy, which many people aren't prepared to give. And I'll tell you, living in an old folks' home, I'm sure I'll still finding that out, because there are times I want to raise an issue and I think I'd have to go over a whole background of information. By that time I'd be a dead duck, so I just keep my mouth shut. But anyway, in contrast, memes are brief, catchy, stir emotions, and appeal to preconceived ideas. They are rapid spreaders. So the key point that I want to carry away from this is that we may not like the idea of memes. We may feel that it's being superficial. But I think we have to admit that they are a prominent way in which ideas spread, and that the main value of memes is as a way to capture interest. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll switch to discussion. And maybe go to the next slide, please. Now, I'm going to suggest you just shuffle your chairs around a bit and make groups of 5 or 6, and I think, can everyone read the questions on the board? Yeah. Okay, well, let's go to it. And I'm going to suggest we go to about 10 minutes after 8, and then we'll have some refreshments, and then we'll get with the last session. Okay?
Hello, everyone. Everybody's talking. Oh, I hate to stop your conversation. Hello. Sorry, I hate to break the conversations, but we have about 10 minutes. There's herbal tea, and there's decaf coffee, and some cookies and water. So help yourself, about 10 minutes, and then we can come back, and Kris will continue.
Your seats, please. Bring your coffee with you and your cookie. And I think we can just be in an informal state. Just if you're having trouble seeing the screen, move a little bit closer, but just stay in your group situation. I'm kind of frustrated because Natalie was kind enough to prepare some material for me, and she told me where it was, but I can't find it, so I'm going to have to make do a bit here. I'll just give a minute for everyone to get seated. I put that last slide back on the screen because I want to re-emphasize the idea. Just take a look at some of those memes that were circulating in the 1950s. Humanists are baby killers because we supported abortion. Humanists are destroying youth's morality because we advocated removing prayer and so on. Humanists or atheists or secularists are morally ungrounded and therefore dangerous. And this was something that was preached from pulpits and I heard it over and over again. Let's go on to the next slide, please. If you remove religion, life becomes meaningless because it threatens the need for security people find in religious faith. Humanism causes despair or depression because the people operate on the idea that unless you have the support of God, you're going to be in a state of despair. So, Stefan, I'm sure you'd remember how some of those memes were spreading, especially in the last half of the 1900s. And they were very vicious. And because I made myself known as a humanist, a lot of those were directed at me very personally. So I have a little bit of personal feeling about some of these things. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Now, why were these negative memes supported? Well, they appealed to response. People saw humanism as a threat against their religion. And so this was part of the way in which they responded to those threats. And they, in particular, they were a threat to existing beliefs, and they prompted emotions like fear, because they thought we were teaching immorality and chaos, anxiety, because we're teaching that humans make their own meaning out of life, and that was deemed to be meaninglessness, and hope. It's a denial of hope because we're denying salvation and the idea of an afterlife. So, in part, it's because these ideas are easy to remember. No God, no morals. Humanists are untrustworthy. Those are the kind of memes that were being circulated. Now, these memes persist not because they are true, but because they fit into how human minds naturally process threats. And humanism was viewed as a very basic threat to traditional religion. So let's go on to the next slide. Now, what James is suggesting is that we should build humanist memes as ways of sort of promoting humanist ideas. And he really hopes that I'll back up one little bit. I didn't really talk about this when I was talking about the Nicene Creed, but I talked about all those different Christian memes and then how they were embodied in the Nicene Creed. Now, in genetics, there are combinations of genes associated with particular phenomena. Like, I'll just give an example. I mentioned this to one of the groups. There is no gene for a God gene. There's no homosexual gene. There's no compassionate gene. But yes, research shows that there are clusters of genes that seem to be associated with those particular behaviors. So people that deal with genes analyze this as a gene complex, a group of genes that tend to support one another. In many ways, the Nicene Creed could be viewed as a meme complex, a group of memes that seem to fit together to produce an overall effect. So what James is suggesting is that we need to come up with a number of memes that create a humanist memeplex, a number of memes that come together to create sort of the main fundamentals of humanism. Okay, next slide, please. So he identifies 4 areas of humanism and suggests that we could be thinking about memes in relation to these. So we think about humanism and then the emphasis on science and evidence. So we could talk about truth-based evidence, scientific method being self-correcting, rational inquiry. Those are kinds of things that could be keys to making memes. Or acceptance of death, the idea of no afterlife, life is finite, meaning comes from human experience. Those are all ideas that could be worked into memes. That could be, that could be very relevant. Ethical humanism, morality with God, and so on. Intellectual freedom, something that's a big issue in humanism. Question everything. No sacred beliefs. Freedom of thought. And then go on to the next slide, please. Now, back up a slide, if you will. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't put that in the slides. That was the part that I had Natalie reproduced. But I came up with a number of different categories and words related to them. And I can't even think of one right now, but I had about 6 or 8 of them. But we can just go with the kinds of things. These are from ideas that the author had. Now, go on to the next slide, please. And I don't usually share my insomnia with people, but on Monday night, Monday morning, I woke up at 5 o'clock and had a very serious insomnia for the rest of the morning. And I'm thinking, I'm going to ask this group of people, without any pre-warning or whatever, to make up some humanist memes. And I thought, my God, could I even do that myself? Am I asking people to do something I can't do myself? So then I started thinking in my half-sleepy sort of way, well, what are some humanist memes? And I came up with about 4 of them. They weren't exactly, so I say great memes, but they're what I came up with. And let me think what they were. One was supernaturalism. Our world is supernatural without that word hyphenated. Our world is supernatural without being supernatural. Is that cute? I think that's a very meaningful sort of thing. And then I had another one that came along. There was something similar. I do have them there. Supernatural, excess baggage in a natural world. That's a little mean, maybe, but anyway, that's one. And then we are a humanistic, free thinkers friendly, and nuns welcome, share basic beliefs for non-believers. I thought this guy talked about having in his mind writing a book, and I've had ideas in my mind for several years of writing a book that would have a title, Basic Beliefs for Non-Believers. And I may even do that in my dying days, but but I think that as we have more and more nuns, they still want to have beliefs, and maybe a little bit of probing and helping might be relevant. So that might be one of the checklists that doesn't get finished. But anyway, so what I'm going to ask you to do is to go back into your groups and see if you can come up with some humanist memes. Now, Natalie was going to have a paper for each person that could write them down, but what I'm going to do is I'll give you about 10 minutes in the group discussion, and then I'll ask you to share any memes, and I'll write them down. So if you return to now, I don't know if I've done enough to build this up, but you folks, by your very nature, are creative, educated, positive, with ideas galore.
No pressure.
So see what you can come up with in terms of catchy memes that will help to promote humanism. Okay?
Uncertainty is life. Feel deeply, think rigorously. Everyone counts or no one counts. Humanism, others matter. Humanity matters. And then we're all we have, which is almost we're all we've got.
The only thing we can't tolerate is intolerance. They were so busy over functioning in the cruise. We went to a train ride.
Community without dogma. The only other one we have is passionate Unitarians.
Community without dogma? I didn't hear the second one.
Avid Unitarians.
Okay, can you hear me now? Oh, yeah. Okay. So I don't know about you, but Kris is amazing. So big round of applause to Kris. So June is going to be the last month, right, for us, for this forum, and then we take off, have July and August off, and we'll continue in September. So in June, second Wednesday, right, we all remember second Wednesday, is going to be, Stefan is going to have a topic about challenges to contemporary humanism. Sounds very, very interesting. So spread the word for other people to come. Yeah, and hopefully we'll see you. Yeah, yes.
Kris just had her birthday. Can we sing happy birthday?
Absolutely. Happy birthday